from history.com. On September 8, 1863, at the Second Battle of Sabine Pass, a small Confederate force thwarts a federal invasion of Texas at the mouth of the Sabine River on the Texas-Louisiana border. In November 1862, Confederate General John Bankhead Magruder assumed command of the District of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. The Union controlled most of the harbors along the Texas coast, but Magruder quickly changed that with two major assaults on Union defenses. He captured Galveston, Texas on January 1, 1863, and then drove off a Yankee force at Sabine Pass later that month. After Magruder's forces drove the Union ships away, the rebels were left with two harbors from which to operate. In the summer of 1863, the Union commander in the region, General Nathaniel Banks, launched an expedition to retake Sabine Pass. He placed General William Franklin in charge of an amphibious force that included 4 gunboats, 18 transports, and nearly 6,000 troops. They set sail from New Orleans, Louisiana, and arrived off Sabine Pass on September 7th. The next day, Franklin called for an invasion of the Confederate band of 47 Irish immigrants commanded by Lieutenant Richard Dowling, which was holed up inside of Fort Griffin, a stronghold armed with 6 old smoothbore cannons. Dowling's men had one major advantage. Their guns were fixed on the narrow channel of Sabine Pass, through which the Yankees would have to sail in order to approach Fort Griffin. The battle commenced in the afternoon, and the Confederate cannons quickly cut into the Union flotilla. The first 2 ships to go through the pass were badly damaged and ran aground. The troop transports ran into trouble, and one Union ship turned around without firing a shot. Franklin called off the attack and returned to New Orleans. While the Confederates did not lose a single man, 28 Yankees were killed, 75 were wounded, and 315 were captured. The loss was humiliating for the Union. Franklin was ridiculed, and Dick Dowling's rebels became heroes. Banks nixed plans for an invasion of East Texas and focused his attention on the Rio Grande Valley. From the American Battlefield Trust, battlefields.org. Union forces attacked Fort Griffin outside of Sabine City along the Sabine River to establish a Union presence in Texas and discourage trade between the Confederacy and Mexico. Known as one of the most lopsided battles of the American Civil War, the Battle of Sabine Pass ended in a Union defeat. How did it end? With a Confederate victory. After 35 minutes of intense and accurate fire from the Confederate garrison at Sabine, 2 Federal ships were destroyed, 200 prisoners captured, and the Union forces withdrew. In context, with the de facto French government under Maximilian I south of the Rio Grande, the Confederates hoped to establish trade between Texas and Mexico to obtain much-needed supplies for the Confederacy. In return, the Confederacy would grant Mexico's de facto French government easier access to southern cotton in exchange for the supplies and military aid. The Lincoln administration, aware of Confederate intentions, sought to establish a military presence in Texas to discourage the French influence. The plan was to place a Union force near Beaumont, 30 miles inland from the mouth of the Sabine River, which would cut the last railroad between Texas and the rest of the Confederacy and could threaten Houston, which was Texas's industrial center. Before the battle, the Confederate garrison at Fort Griffin, established to protect Sabine City, only numbered 46 men. The gunners practiced firing artillery at range markers placed in the river to break the day-to-day monotony. During the battle, a combined total of 5,046 on forces engaged from both sides, 5,000 from the Union and 46 from the Confederacy. In the end, a total combined of 230 casualties were marked, all from the Union. The Confederacy did not lose a single man. About 6 a.m. on the morning of September 6, 1863, a Union flotilla of 4 gunboats and 7 troop transports under the command of General William Franklin steamed into Sabine Pass and up the Sabine River to reduce Fort Griffin and land troops. As the gunboats approached Fort Griffin, they came under accurate fire from 6 cannons. The fort's small force of 46 men, under the command of Lieutenant Dick Dowling, disabled 2 ships, captured the gunboat Clifton with about 200 prisoners, and forced the Union flotilla to retire. The Confederate defenders suffered no casualties, and Union operations in the area ceased. The heroics at Fort Griffin, 46 men stopping a Union expedition, inspired other Confederates and became known as one of the most lopsided battles of the Civil War. Question: why were the defenders of Fort Griffin celebrated for their victory at the Battle of Sabine Pass? With a garrison of only 46 men, it is astonishing that they could defeat a Federal force of almost 5,000 men in such a short time, damaged 2 Federal gunboats, and captured 200 prisoners. It was also a morale boost, especially after the string of defeats at Gettysburg, Vicksburg, and Port Hudson. What was the Union's goal in capturing Fort Griffin? The Union's goal was to capture and use Fort Griffin to open up Texas and stop the Confederates from trading with French-occupied Mexico. In addition, their end goal was to capture the industrial center of Houston, which also served as a Trans-Mississippi Department headquarters. Also from the American Battlefield Trust, about 6 a.m. on the morning of September 8, 1863, a Union flotilla of 4 gunboats and 7 troop transports steamed into Sabine Pass and up the Sabine River with the intention of reducing Fort Griffin and landing troops to begin occupying Texas. Some of the boats' names include the Laurel Hill, Exact, General Banks, Thomas, Landis, Suffolk, St. Charles, Granite City, the Clifton, Shachim, Arizona. While on the other side, the Confederates had Josiah H. Bell and the Uncle Ben. After the Clifton and Shachim were disabled, the Federal fleet withdrew back down to the Sabine River for New Orleans. As the gunboats approached Fort Griffin, they came under accurate fire from 6 cannons. The Confederate gunners at Fort Griffin had been sent there as a punishment. To break the day-to-day monotony, the gunners practiced firing artillery at range markers placed in the river. Their practice obviously paid off. Fort Griffin's small force of 44 men forced the Union flotilla to retire and captured the gunboat Clifton and about 200 prisoners. Further Union operations in the area ceased for about a month. From the Texas Historical Commission. On September 8, 1863, the Battle of Sabine Pass turned back one of several Union attempts to invade and occupy part of Texas during the Civil War. The U.S. Navy blockaded the Texas coast beginning in the summer of 1861, while Confederates fortified the major ports. Union interest in Texas and other parts of the Confederacy west of the Mississippi River resulted primarily from the need for cotton by northern textile mills and concern about French intervention in the Mexican Civil War. In September 1863, General Nathaniel Banks sent 4,000 soldiers by transport from New Orleans under the command of General William Franklin to gain a foothold at Sabine Pass, where the Sabine River flows into the Gulf of Mexico. A railroad ran from Sabine Pass to Houston and opened the way into the interior of the state. The Western Gulf Blockading Squadron of the U.S. Navy sent 4 gunboats mounting 18 guns to protect the landing of the transport troops. The Union commander, Lieutenant Frederick Crocker, formed a plan for the gunboats to enter the pass and silence the Fort Griffin guns so the troops could land. At Sabine Pass, the Davis Guards, a Confederate army composed of 45 enlisted men, 1 engineer, 1 surgeon, all Irish and in their younger 20s, manned Fort Griffin, which was constructed by 500 conscripted slaves. The fort consisted of an earthwork that mounted 6 cannons, 2 24-pounders, and 4 32-pounders. The USS Clifton shelled the fort from long range between 6:30 and 7:30 a.m. on September 8th. The Confederates remained undercover because the ship was out of reach of their cannons. Behind the fort, Confederate officers gathered reinforcements, although their limited numbers would make resistance difficult if the Federal troops landed. At 3:40 p.m., the Union gunboats began their advance through the pass, firing on the fort as they steamed forward. Under the direction of Lieutenant Dowling, the Confederate cannoneers emerged to man their guns as the ships came within 1,200 yards. One cannon in the fort ran off its platform after an early shot, but the artillerymen fired the remaining 5 cannons with great accuracy. A shot from the third or fourth round hit the boiler on the USS Sachem, which exploded, killing and wounding many of the crew and leaving the gunboat without power in the channel. The following ship, the USS Arizona, could not pass the USS Sachem and withdrew from the action. The USS Clifton, which also carried several sharpshooters, continued up the channel near the Texas shore until a shot from the fort cut away its tiller rope. That left the gunboat without the ability to steer and caused it to run aground, where its crew continued to exchange fire with the Confederate gunners. Another well-aimed projectile into the border of the USS Clifton sent steam and smoke through the vessel and forced the sailors to abandon ship. The USS Granite City also turned back, thus ending the Federal assault. The Davis Guards fired their cannons 107 times in 35 minutes of action, a rate of less than 2 minutes per shot, restraint as far more rapid than the standard for heavy artillery. The Confederates captured 350 Union prisoners and 2 gunboats. General Franklin and the Union forces turned back to New Orleans, although Union troops occupied the Texas coast from Brownsville to Matagorda Bay later that fall. The Confederates, who suffered no casualties during the battle, received the gratitude from the Confederate Congress for their victory. Careful fortification, range marking, and artillery practice had produced a successful defense of Sabine Pass. Here's some other known facts from the Texas Historical Commission. Dick Dowling was born in Tuam, Ireland in 1836. In an attempt to escape poverty, his family fled the country in 1846 for the U.S. and initially resided in New Orleans. Dowling died in 1867 when he was 30 years old from yellow fever, the same disease that took his parents. He is buried at St. Vincent's Cemetery in Houston. Although the site is most known for its role in the Civil War, it was also used as a U.S. Army coastal artillery battery during World War II. 4 historic munitions magazines are still located on site. There are 2 Fort Griffins in Texas. One was the fort established at Sabine Pass during the Civil War. The other Fort Griffin is located at Albany, Texas, and was constructed as one in the line of frontier defense forts from 1867 to 1881. Both forts are Texas Historical Commission properties. Sabine Pass Battleground was named one of the 10 most threatened American battlefields by the Civil War Preservation Trust in March 2009. This was chosen due to its hurricane-prone location. From the Texas State Historical Association about Fort Griffin. The Jefferson County Fort Griffin was a Confederate fort located in the southeastern part of the county of what is now Farm Road 3322, 15 miles south of Port Arthur. Hoping to block Union threats to the upper Texas Gulf Coast, General John Magruder dispatched Majors Julius Kelsberg to build a fort in Sabine Pass in March 1863. With 30 engineers and 500 slaves, Kelsberg constructed a triangular fort on an eminence overlooking the Sabine River. The installation housed 6 gun emplacements and bomb-proofs built into a sawtooth front, and timber and railroad iron reinforced the earthwork position. The fort was named for the commander of the 21st Texas Battalion, Colonel William Griffin. In September 1863, 4 Union gunboats leading a strong amphibious invasion force attacked Fort Griffin. At the Battle of Sabine Pass, Lieutenant Dowling and a 46-man garrison, with 2 of their 6 guns put out of action, disabled 2 of the attacking vessels and scattered the remainder of the Union ships. In anticipation of another possible Federal assault, Fort Griffin was strengthened with several captured Parrott rifles and temporarily reinforced. By January 1st, 1864, however, the garrison, one of the last coastal positions remaining in Southern hands, had been reduced to 268 men. Confederate troops spiked the 5 remaining cannons and abandoned Fort Griffin on May 24, 1865. Erosion and the channelization of Sabine Pass have removed evidence of Fort Griffin's exact location. However, a statue and a plaque at Sabine Pass Battleground Site Historical Park mark what is thought to have been the site of the fort. At the battlefield, there are several artifacts and memorials to look at. Some of them you have already seen in this video. One of the first things I noticed on the site was the walking beam of the USS Clifton. It was salvaged from the waters near Sabine Pass after the ship's intentional burning by Confederate troops. The walking beam itself is essential in powering a 19th century steamship. Also standing on the site are the 4 ammunition bunkers. And obviously, with the battlegrounds set up as a military base, they'd had to have plenty of room to store their ammunitions. I mean, cannonballs, cannon powder, fuses, and many more, including whatever muskets and rifles they may have had. And as you saw already, they were already open for viewing. You can see how much was able to be stowed in these in-ground storage units. The statue of Lieutenant Dick Dowling is also on display. There's a sculpture with Dowling seemed to be facing the mouth of the Sabine Pass River leading out to the Gulf. Also, there was a monument dedicated to the Union soldiers who lost their lives in the Battle of Sabine Pass. And you already saw the monument of Fort Griffin, which is pretty much a model display of how Fort Griffin looked on the Sabine River, and also where the cannons were mounted and how they were mounted. Also at the battle site, you will find an exhibit on the Sabine Pass Lighthouse. During its lifespan of roughly a century and a half, the Sabine Pass Lighthouse has survived Civil War battles, innumerable storms, surging floodwaters, a marsh fire, vandalism, and long periods of neglect and indifference. The Cameron Preservation Alliance, Sabine Pass Lighthouse Inc., was formed in 1999 to rescue the lighthouse. The group will hopefully succeed with their ambitious project, permitting individuals to experience this unique lighthouse firsthand, rather than through one-dimensional words and photographs. On March 3, 1849, Congress appropriated $7,500 for a lighthouse at Sabine Pass. Shortly thereafter, Commander Henry Adams of the Navy arrived in the area on horseback to investigate the need for and possible location of a lighthouse. In his report, Adams concluded that the coast is so free from danger in that vicinity, the place itself so easy to access, and the business done there so inconsiderable that, in my opinion, a lighthouse is not necessary at the time. His advice was heeded, and all of the allotment, save $116, was transferred to a surplus fund. Texan citizens near Sabine Pass strongly disagreed with the surveyor's findings, and politicians continued to petition Congress for a lighthouse at the pass. Exactly 4 years after the original allocation, $30,000 was set apart for a first-class lighthouse at the mouth of the Sabine River. This time, a different surveyor recommended that a lighthouse be built and suggested a site on the east side of that river. The land was readily obtained, and it was part of a large military reservation established by the federal government in 1838 at what was the western frontier of the United States. Work on the 80-foot brick tower and adjacent wooden dwelling began in the latter part of 1855 under the direction of John Wilson, and the lighthouse went into service sometime in late spring or early summer of 1857. While some of the forces were constructing Fort Griffin on the west bank of the Sabine River, Union soldiers who were part of the naval blockade on the Sabine spied on the progress of the defensive works from on top of the Sabine Pass Lighthouse. Early on the morning on April 16, 1863, Confederate soldiers secreted themselves at the lighthouse and waited for the arrival of the day's spying party. 2 whaleboats soon landed at the station, and the sailors started to make their way to the tower. The leading party of 3 quietly surrendered when surprised by the Confederates. but the remainder resisted and retreated to the boats as gunfire erupted from both sides. 4 Northerners were killed, while the Confederates just lost 1 soldier in that skirmish. 5 months later, the Battle of Sabine Pass was fought practically in the shadow of the tower. Still, the lighthouse managed to survive the war remarkably well, and on December 23, 1865, it was returned to service after having been reunited with its lens that had earlier been shipped to New York by Union forces.